Right, now you've started to get your head around terms like what shifts the demand curve, what shifts the supply curve, what causes an expansion and a contraction in demand. Now we're going to have a look at something that can cause a double shift. The double shift. The double shift means that there will be a shift in both demand and supply. So here's an example from last year's exam. This is looking at the global demand and supply for crude oil, for example. Now what happened in 2014, the end of 2014, the start of 2015, is that there was a fall in the demand for crude oil, and that was largely due to weaker growth rates around the world. So countries weren't growing as fast, they weren't needing as much oil because production was slowing down. And secondly, that America started to develop ways to get access to their own oil. So there was this concept of fracking that started to occur in America, which allowed them to increase their oil production. So two things happened. At the start of 2014, the price per barrel for oil was around $100 per barrel. $100 per barrel, and at the start of 2014, that was our equilibrium. Demand, D1, and supply, S1, was at this point here. So demand was equal to supply. And we had an equilibrium at $100 a barrel at quantity 1, whatever that was, in barrels. What happened? Then something happened. Two things happened. One, the demand for oil started to reduce. So as I said to you before, countries reduced their demand for oil, and demand shifted from D1 to D2. So what that means is if we keep charging $100 per barrel for oil, world demand is now at this point here. Okay? It has reduced. It has moved to the left. So at a price of $100, demand has moved to the left, but because America started to develop ways to get their own oil, supply actually increased. So there was more countries supplying a greater volume of oil. And this is quite a dramatic increase in supply. You can see the curve has shifted all the way from S1 to S2. So now at a price of $100, our supply is around this point here. So supply is here, and demand is all the way back here. Okay, demand has fallen, supply has increased. So we have what we call a massive surplus of oil. We have, at a price of $100, they're not going to be able to sell all their oil to the world market. So what's going to happen if we have a surplus? Well, we know we have to lower the price. So what happens is the producers lower the price. Okay, they lower the price to $50. Okay, so there was a surplus, then we lowered the price to $50. And the lower price has two different effects. The lower prices causes an expansion in demand. We know lower prices expand demand. So we move along this demand curve D2 all the way down to E2. But because there's not as much profits available in this sector, supply will reduce. There will be what we call a contraction in supply. So because oil is now no longer as profitable, supply contracts to E2 because businesses are going to find other ways that are more likely to produce in other areas that are more profitable. So there'll be less oil being produced or less incentive to get the oil out of the ground because we're only getting $50 a barrel instead of $100. And so we arrive at point E2 with a quantity that was slightly higher than before, but at a much lower price. So oil companies aren't making as much money as they were in the past. So to sum up what happened in this graph, demand shifted to the left, supply shifted to the right. We had a big surplus. As soon as we have a surplus, we have to do something. So the producers go, we're going to lower the price so we don't have all this oil that we're not selling. They lower the price. That causes an expansion in demand, more affordable for consumers, and a contraction in supply until we reach this point E2. You need to be able to follow that whole process through. So demand shifted to the left because of a reduced world demand, and supply shifted to the right due to fracking in the USA. It's led to a massive surplus at the old price. Producers reduced their price, and it is the lower price that causes both an expansion in demand and a contraction in supply. You can't do this final step before you do this step, or it doesn't make sense. Something has to have caused demand to expand and supply to contract. So if we went back to this example and I gave you another one where demand was to shift to the right and supply was to shift to the left, how are you going to answer that?